So let's try to understand the purpose of Buddhist meditation. There are many kinds of Buddhist meditation because Buddha always taught according to the dispositions, capacities, and different characteristics of the people who would be practicing it. And so therefore, but basically we can divide them into two types. Some are like what are called the analytical meditations. And in these cases then, there's a lot of things to learn, a lot of things to reflect on. So one analyzes logically all kinds of things until one reaches a full conviction of what Buddha has described as being the true nature of reality, or in other words, the true nature of our being, which is actually the purpose of any kind of Buddhist teaching, is to reach and start to live from what we basically are. In Buddhism, it is said that all beings, all of us, have our basic nature, our essential nature is what is called Buddha nature. And it is that level of mind in which there is absolutely no kind of distortion, is a totally natural mind, and it coincides with the mind in its natural state. It is a state that is beyond concepts. You cannot really think of it. You cannot also express it in words. You cannot describe it, but it can be known. And that is what Buddha and millions of people who follow the path have come to prove, that you can know even though you are not using thought, even though you're not using words. This basic state, the essence of our being, is actually something that contains all these sublime qualities, unlimited, without any kind of restrictions, sublime qualities which are now perfect also, of infinite compassion and infinite love, infinite wisdom, all the sublime qualities that actually are innate within us. And the whole purpose of following the path of Buddhism is to first recognize that state and then start to function from that state in such a way that eventually we become with a constant and total stable experience of that state. That means to say that we are that state. We are that wisdom. We are that level of full perfection. And then we function from that state, which is not really a state, but this is what we really are. We have always been a Buddha. We will always be a Buddha. And we are now also, in this very moment, a Buddha. The only great problem is that we don't see it. So we need a path. And the heart of the path is the meditation. That's really the heart of the path, that it's something that we have to resort to, because it is a technique that will teach our mind to know without thinking. All the knowledge that we have built up in our education, which is very elaborate and sophisticated education that we have in the West, everything that we know, everything that we learn is based on concepts. It's based on one concept upon the other, then they form kind of like a network of concepts, and then we create something new that did not exist before. We did not know something, we study, and then we end up knowing it. That's the way the conceptual knowledge is built. But in this case, then we have a different type of object that we need to know, because the object itself is quite elusive. It's non-conceptual. We cannot really apprehend it through concepts. It's beyond thoughts. And you cannot really also describe it with words, because it's beyond the intellect, beyond words. So we need a technique of learning which has to be radically different than what we are used to, if we want to approach and discover and also live from that state, from that level of our essential being. So when we're using analytical meditation, we do use concepts. And it doesn't matter, because we can use good concepts, concepts that will bring us, that at present we're quite alienated from our basic being, and will teach us through conviction. And because our intellect then is satisfied, it reached the conviction, then as human beings, when we are convinced about something, we have inspiration. And that will be the force that will make us progress in the path and doing different practices and so forth. Analytical meditations also include the development of love, of compassion, of equanimity, of empathy, altruism, all kinds of things that can be developed through concept and through thinking. Thinking that when we are thinking about the nature of reality, it's just an intellectual kind of cognitive stuff, but when we are developing love and compassion, then we use thinking in order to awaken and feeling and awaken emotions, which are very healthy. Emotions that really are in tune with our basic being, emotions of love, of compassion, and so forth. So that is analytical meditation. But there's another type of approach, which is called, I call it contemplative meditation. Literally, is the meditation of letting the mind rest on its own. But it is shorter to say contemplative meditation. So, and it has to do very much more with the idea that we have of contemplation, right? Of that somehow the mind is seeing something. It doesn't need, of course, contemplation is also used like discursively, but not in this case. We have to more like start to approach the meaning of the word contemplation as Thomas Merton uses, and all the representatives of Thomas Merton's lineage and teachings and so forth use it. Contemplation means the mind is contemplating, is just seeing, is resting, or whatnot. In that second case, which is actually the practice that will lead us to experience and realize our true nature, that particular type of meditation is a meditation that will teach the mind to start to lose the grip of concept. Because our minds are totally controlled by concept and by thinking. And here there has to be some, sometimes when we talk about meditating, then either it is like in the first case, then you sit, you meditate because you think about something, you think about love, you think about joy, you think about bliss or whatever, and you evoke these kind of feelings within oneself, which is all right. But in this other case, then the main problem is thinking. The main problem are not thoughts, and that is something that I think it's interesting to clarify, because sometimes people think that then the meditation consists in emptying the mind of thoughts and resting in a blank mind, and then you're meditating wonderfully. But not in our type of meditation. Thoughts is the nature of things that our minds produce thoughts. Is the nature of things that fire heats and water wets, because that is the nature of things. So it is the nature of things that mind will produce thoughts. And thoughts don't have any problem. I mean, they have a problem, or they can be an obstacle when we think. It sounds maybe weird, but we can have thoughts and not think. And that is a specific feature that we develop in the practice of meditation. It's some function of the mind which we call awareness, which is quite strange. The mind has the capacity to somehow split itself into some part of the mind that is watching the other part of the mind. So sometimes we are not thinking and we are perceiving something. We just have an immediate knowing of something. If I look at the stairs, I know stairs. It doesn't mean that I'm thinking about the stairs, how many steps, and which kind of carpet and so forth. That is thinking. But I can just know stairs, I know bowl, I know table. Now I can get involved with what I know and start to think, like for instance, steps and so forth. So that would be thinking. But in both cases, what happens with us, almost normally, almost all the time, I would say, is that we are not aware when we know, and we're not aware when we think. To be aware when we know means that I know that I'm knowing. And then you start to see that there is some part of the mind that is aware, or that it knows what is happening at that time at the cognitive level. I'm knowing something. Or when you think, then what usually happens when we think is that we're totally drawn by thought. We lost notion of the present moment. We're thinking about all kinds of things. Sometimes we know what we are thinking, but usually we know it after we thought. But most of the times it's even worse, because we don't even know what we're thinking. And that's called distraction. We might be here, and maybe the mind just completely went, and I'm in Paris or in some kind of nice beach or something even worse, or whatever. And then, and we lost notion of what's going on right now. And unfortunately, I think that's most of the time, that is what is happening in the working of our minds. We are addicted to distraction. It's terrible to say, but I think distraction has completely taken over our mental activity. It takes quite a lot of effort to be concentrated, to read some part, to keep the mind in the present moment seems quite a difficult task. The problem with distraction is that thoughts have developed a strength, a kind of power over our attention, which they don't have inherently. It's just like a thought is just a movement in the mind, some kind of brain process that happens. But it is because of so much habituation to distraction, then thoughts draw our attention constantly, again and again and again. And what happens is that then we lose awareness of the present moment. The main objective of Buddhism is to experience reality as it is. Not only our own reality, which would be like experiencing what here has been called mostly the true self, which is that Buddha nature. That Buddha nature, by the way, is not something that only belongs to Buddhists and that Buddhism has a copyright on. Buddha nature is the absolute nature of reality, and Buddha is someone who came and said, well, I could see it, I could experience it, and I can show you a path. And I'm sure other traditions also have access to that kind, because it doesn't belong to anyone. We're talking about the essential nature of the whole universe, of ourselves also. So therefore, the goal of Buddhism is quite high, because we want to start to live from that level and cease to live from our present kind of structure as a human being, because it has a lot of limitations, a lot of conditionings. I mean, our present existence is not really free. We just come without knowing to this world, and we leave without deciding when we want to leave. We don't want to lie. We don't want to get sick. We don't want to get old. But it is the nature of things. My human nature has these characteristics. We are conditioned. We think we are free. Of course, we are much more free than many decades ago, socially. But actually, we can't be free when a thought of anger comes up and my whole mind becomes totally taken over by anger. And we can't be free when a thought that brings me down and makes me be depressed for half a day, one day, or even in sick people, even more so. We are not free when suddenly somebody says something because they had some success, and we have some kind of, we're shaken with some kind of envy or jealousy, which has no meaning at all. I mean, instead of rejoicing with the other person, then we're shaken with this green sense of jealousy. So that means to say that our minds are not free. They're controlled by these afflictions. And so actually thinking can be a problem. Thoughts can be a problem if we think, but they are no problem if we really just take them as some passing thing that happens in our minds. And the same happens with anything that we perceive with the senses. In our type of practice, we don't block the senses. Our eyes will be open, our ears will be open. We are kind of ready to perceiving anything that can happen. That does not mean that we are seeking to perceiving and really being attentive to see what happens, but the senses are all doors to cognizance. They're all doors to clarity, to that lucidity of the mind. And of course, in the practice of meditation, the first step is to develop stillness, because our minds are so, the noise in our minds is so strong and our distraction is so strong, it is unable to stay still, even for a second, even for 2 seconds, 3 seconds, even for a second. It's quite an amazing way that we live, usually with our minds quite distracted. So the first step is to develop stillness. But then also with that stillness, we always have to have that lucidity, that clarity that knows that we're still. And that clarity would also let us know when there is a thought. And it will be strong enough, if we cultivate it, that when there is a thought, we don't get caught up by the thought, but we just see it as a passing wave. Thoughts, in fact, they arise from our basic nature, like waves arise from the sea, and then they also disappear in the sea. The waves disappear in the sea. The thoughts, if we do not grasp, if we don't cling to them, they just disappear and go back to our basic nature, to the mind. So the first step that we need to do in meditation is to still the mind. It is something that has many benefits. It also has benefits in a worldly sense, because of course we will have a much more quieter mind and we will experience much more peace. We will experience a peace that we have gained because it is ours. It's not something that we could go out and buy in a mall. Very rich people cannot have peace. Well, they can have peace, but it doesn't mean that because they have money, that means to say that they have gained peace. In many cases, it's the other way around. Like somehow they have a lot of worries in the mind and so forth. So it's not something we can buy. It's not something that is given to us. We may gain some peace with some kind of drug, but it's kind of like a dull type of peace. Peace is, if we gain that kind of stillness of mind, we will experience like an inner space as we have not experienced before, which is actually very healthy, because then everything that comes up in the mind, thoughts, emotions, afflictions, bad emotions, negative emotions, they don't impact us anymore. Situations don't impact us anymore. Tragedies don't impact, they impact us, but they kind of sort it out within that space, and then we have a way to respond, which is based on that kind of experience of well-being, the experience of peace, which is a much better way than jumping into the situation without much control, so to speak, on ourselves. But in any case, Buddhist practice doesn't stop there. Stillness is just a stepping stone. We need it. It's very convenient, because when the mind is still, then the brightness of lucidity, of clarity, of that cognizance can work properly. It's a very traditional example, but it's a very good one. It's a candle with a flame. If you have a good flame, but the candle is in wind, you cannot really illuminate the place, because the candle is going, like the flame is going one side to the other. That is the example of a moving mind. But then you may have a mind that is still, but the flame is very, very small. Also, you cannot illuminate the place. When you have a good flame, which would be the lucidity of the mind, and stillness, which would be the calmness of the mind, the stillness, the combination of these two is an excellent combination that will lead us eventually to the mind becoming more quiet, more still, but lucid, and within that stillness, in which it's not anymore affected by thoughts, even though there may be thoughts, and is not affected by the dullness that may happen by having no thoughts, but because it's always aware. Aware when there is no thoughts, aware when there is thoughts, then that kind of stillness is a stillness that will lead us eventually, itself will start to drop anything that has been distorting it, and it will enter by itself into its own nature, and in that way then it becomes transcendent. It will be contacting the true self or Buddha nature, or however we want to call it, and from then on we can start to function from that side. So the first step, I think, is to develop stillness, and for that, then we have to have kind of a clear intention before, like that. Now I'm not going to be taken over by a thought. Just a simple thought like that, like a determination that thoughts, let them pass, but I'm not going to get involved with thoughts. Because if I get involved with thoughts, that's thinking. Thinking is no good. Thoughts, no problem. So at this point, I mean, of course, thinking for working and everything, we need to think. But then we have to destroy the magnetism that thoughts have on us, this kind of strength that it has, that pulls out our attention again and again. And the way to do that is not to even qualify the thought. This type of practice is not about cultivating good thoughts and blocking bad thoughts. It has nothing to do with that, because then we are kind of getting involved with the thoughts. It's more like perceiving thoughts as what they are. They're kind of neutral stuff. If they become good, it's because we put something good on it. If they become bad, it's because we put something bad on that. But in themselves, it's just a fleeting mind movement. So if we are able to become kind of indifferent to the thought, I don't care what you say. If you're a good thought, it doesn't matter. I go back to the object of meditation. You're a bad thought, I don't care. Neither good nor bad. We don't qualify the thought. We just see it as thought. If we are training ourselves to see a thought as a thought itself, we are giving a step forward, quite a very convenient kind of step forward towards meditation. So, and that is what we are cultivating here, because when the mind is aware and perceives the thought, then it will not have a second instance in which then we will get involved with the thought, because we know through that awareness that we have to come back to the object of meditation. All right? So at first we'll do a practice which is very common in Buddhist tradition, in also other traditions, which is a practice of following the breath. It is an object of meditation, and following the breath means that our attention is when we inhale and then when we exhale, and then again and again our attention is fully in the inhalation and exhalation of the breath. When a thought comes, then as soon as possible we have to detect the thought. And the moment we detect it, then we have to come back to the breath. Not allow our mind to, again, just after that thought, a second thought, because then again the train of thoughts will drive us away. So that is kind of the main objective of the practice, and the determination is that when a thought comes, then we come back to the breath. It's not much. It's very simple somehow. Let's see if it's so simple to practice, but it is very simple in words. But let's try it. And then within that, we will go into a formless meditation, a meditation which does not require a support of the breath. I will at some point start to say a few words on how to shift from that meditation that is based on the support into an unsupported type of meditation. So shall we do that? The main point of the posture, of course, well, if one can sit like cross-legged, that would be fine, but on chair, no problem. But the back should be very straight, if you can do that. The hands on the knees, the shoulders like opening the chest, but not completely like relaxed, but kind of opening, not slumped like this. And then there's also the throat forms like a little bit like a hook. So your chin falls down a little bit, and the eyes are open, at least in Buddhist meditation. But we kind of let the gaze fall at about 1 meter or 1 yard away from the body. We can blink, no problem. If you find this very difficult, you can also meditate with eyes closed, no problem. And if you're used to another meditation with eyes closed, then you continue with that meditation. Eyes open is something that is a feature of Buddhist meditation because we are not blocking the senses. So therefore, eyes cannot be blocked in as much as we are not putting like ear plugs, and we are not like blocking our nose and stuff like that. We just let the senses are open. That's also a part of Buddhist meditation. So let's do a little bit of that meditation. It may be easier to count the breath, like a whole cycle of inhaling and exhaling as 1, and then 2 and 3, up to 7. And then when reaching 7, just take a rest, maybe about 20 seconds, not by the watch, but in which then you cease to focus on the breath. But you keep a kind of more global kind of attention, of presence, of awareness. Not filling yourself with thoughts and plans and things to do. Just awareness is the key. And that is what we cultivate in meditation. when a thought comes, we just notice the thought and then automatically come back to the breath. If we hear a noise, just a sound, we can't even recognize the sound, it comes automatically. Like if someone coughs, then we can say cough. It will come, cough. That's all. No need to get involved into why this cough or whatever. And back to the breath. Then sounds and sights and smells and thoughts and emotions, whatever happens in the mind, they just pass by. We simply notice them, we're simply aware of them, and come back to the breath. Neither too tight, too concentrated, trying to perceive every single thing that happens. Not to lose, otherwise we just lose clarity, we relax too much. There is a point of balance between tightness and looseness that we have to find. It is very personal. Only oneself can know one's own point of balance. Now let's forget about the breathing. Let's let the mind just rest on its own. Means it will rest on the present moment. What is happening right now? Right now, maybe there are no thoughts. The mind is totally still. So we notice, we're aware that there are no thoughts. And maybe there is a movement of thought. We notice that movement of thought. That thought may be something that happened in the past, or some kind of anticipation of the future. But it is actually happening in the present moment. So that is what counts, not the contents of the thought. What is happening in the present moment is that the mind is having a movement of thought, and we are aware of that. So in that way, then, whether there are thoughts or non-thought, all the time we are aware, and thoughts cease to be a problem. They become also like helpers in our meditation. We don't have to go back to anything as before, in which we had to go back to breath. Here we're just in the present moment, watching non-thought and watching, or that means to say stillness, or watching a movement when there is a thought. Again, the most important aspect is that we are aware of stillness and aware of movement. Then that can be called meditation. Just let the mind rest on its own natural flow. Undistracted, relaxed, without trying to alter it in any way whatsoever. Whatever there is, whatever is happening there, just let it be on its own. There's no need to interfere and always be manipulating everything. Just let it be. It is said that non-distraction is the path that the Buddhist has followed in the past. It is also the path that anyone who will become enlightened in the future will have to follow. And it is also the path that all those who are becoming enlightened are following. Because non-distraction is like is the most or the supreme kind of instruction. Of course, at the beginning, non-distraction, which is the other counterpart of being aware, is not being distracted from the present moment. But the present moment is still a concept because time, like past, present, and future, they are concepts. We have to go beyond the concept. So when that step is done and the mind enters that transcendent state of its own nature, which is beyond thought and beyond words and so forth, then from then on, one does not become distracted from that state, not from present moment. Of course, present moment will be there, but then it is a step forward. Non-distraction is the path of all the Buddhas, applies mostly to the second step, in which we don't lose the continuity of our basic being. And when we lose it, because we became distracted, we go back, and we go back. So this is a way in which it is said, meditation is there is an analogy in the scriptures that says a room that has been in darkness for many millions of eons, then the darkness accumulated in that room is dispelled instantly with just by turning the light. Even one instant of turning the light on then dispels that darkness and everything becomes visible. It doesn't mean that it went gradually. It just meant that the moment the light came, darkness disappeared. And it is also said that meditating on the nature of mind, this kind of meditation that we did, which will lead us to knowing the nature of mind, one instant of the mind knowing its own nature will dispel eons accumulation of obscurations and negativities and so forth. It will be like the light that illuminates all our being. So therefore, in the context of the activity that we may do, and whether it is something positive or not, then meditation is considered to be one of the most positive things that we can do. It really is the key to enlightenment, is the key to coming to experiencing our own essence. We cannot do it through reading books. We cannot do it through debates. We may have studied 15, 20, 40 years, and yet it would be like a dry type of knowledge, just theory. And what makes Buddhism alive even to this day is not the theory, which is huge, it's not philosophy or the text and 108 main volumes of Buddha's words and 200 and some volumes of the commentaries of the great scholars on these words. The whole canon of Buddhist scriptures, that is not really what makes Buddhism live. The fact that there is still Buddhism still is alive now is that there are people who have made contact with their own being, who are living with their true self, are functioning from their true self, and then can also guide us. Fortunately, they know how to guide us to that state, which is our basic state. That is what we actually are. We've always been that, and it is only a matter of discovering it, seeing it, taking what covers it. This cover is a good word. It's that we take the lid off. Obscurations, emotional obscurations, cognitive obscurations, all kinds. But these obscurations, they're not really concrete things, they're not true. They're actually like, invalid perceptions, invalid cognitions. So therefore, by the light of truth, they completely dissipate. So, I don't know. I thought we could do some questions, but we need 3 minutes for the silence now, no? Maybe one question we can take, if you want. Yeah.
The difference between japa, the invocation of the divine name,
Yeah.
and what you're doing. I've always understood the use of the name while breathing was a great support, and the same with the mala. What is the difference between that and being aware and watching thoughts?
Yeah. Japa is, well, in Buddhism, japa and recitation of mantra is done in conjunction with a whole process of the tantric tradition in which then you start to change your perception. Since you are a Buddha now, although you don't see it, why don't we start to build up habits of perceiving ourselves as a Buddha, right? So it's not only the japa, the repetition of the mantra. That is kind of contacting the voice of the deity. No, we identify with Buddhas, like there's Tara and Manjushri, different types of enlightened beings with whom we may have some kind of affinity, and therefore we start to change our perception of ourselves, perceiving our body like the deity, perceiving our voice like the strength of the mantra, and perceiving anything that happens in our mind, starting to relate to that as manifestations of the wisdom of the deity. So it's a whole process of transforming our perception from our current perception into the pure perception, which would respond and be more in accordance to our nature of being, which is we are Buddhas. So then why not start to train ourselves, accustom ourselves to how does a Buddha perceive, So that is, you need an initiation, is the whole path of Tantra. So repetition of mantra, actually mantra itself means, literally means, is a manutraya in Sanskrit, and it means protecting the mind. So when you're reciting the mantra, then the vibration that the mantra produces is such that it will protect the mind from falling not only into negativity and so forth, but from falling into the confused states of mind like duality. Very basic, very fundamental affliction that we have is ignorance. And that means to say our mind's functioning in duality, right? So therefore, repetition of mantra, the mantra has also that power of preventing us from falling into that state of ignorance or confusion. I know in other traditions you need a mantra, and when you recite the mantra, then it helps concentration. It helps still the mind. We mostly use it in conjunction with that. No, we use it in the transforming the perception of the body, transforming the perception of speech, and transforming the mind. And that is the way to contact the divine. I mean, so to speak, because you mentioned these words, and it's true. I mean, we are contacting the divine in ourselves, which is we are Buddha. And then I can be Tara, I can be also Manjushri, I can be Shakyamuni, I can be any Buddha, so many Buddhas that manifest the enlightened qualities. Then I can also be that. And basically, there's nothing that can really validate that I'm really Gerardo in this body. This is something that comes out of the confusion of ignorance, the way I perceive myself now. It's not based on actual reality. It's based on the confusion of ignorance. So why not starting to believe what I am, which is I am Buddha. I am a Buddha. So therefore, then I'm contacting the divine. Usually you say you contact the divine through body, which would be mudra, and then through speech, which would be mantra, and then through mind, which would be samadhi, which is another way of expressing. It's like a gateway to our own true nature through the use of different aspects, within which then japa has that kind of function in the Buddhist tradition. Yeah. Of course, reciting these mantras, I think, mantras do not need to have a logical meaning. Yeah, that's one of characteristic of the mantra. Some mantras can be translated, but there are other mantras they don't have. Because they've been pronounced by enlightened beings, and they are mostly in Sanskrit. They've never been translated in the Buddhist tradition. They have not been translated into Tibetan, to keep the same kind of vibration, because it's not a matter of translating the meaning. And when you read them, they don't have much meaning. Like the most famous Tibetan mantra is Om Mani Padme Hum, right? Om is Om, universal sound. Hum also represents the enlightened mind. And you have Mani Padma, Mani Padma. Mani means jewel, Padma means lotus. So what do you make of that, Om, lotus, jewel, moon, or hung, it doesn't really mean much, but it doesn't matter. Many people have become enlightened reciting that mantra, so it does not really have to do with the intellectual meaning. Yeah. Okay, shall we do this? We'll do 1 minute now, because 1 minute of silence, please. Thank you.